live on Facebook. All right. Good evening, SOMI Docs. Live from New York or Michigan or wherever we all might be. We are on the physician panel to follow the Tuesday night lecture series. And this week's topic was Twitter. And so I currently have two of our SOMI Docs physicians with me, and two more should be arriving anytime now. We'll go ahead and get started and welcome them as they arrive. So I'd like you to tell us where you are, maybe your specialty, and any key facts you have about Twitter, or maybe perceptions other than facts. Nina, let's start with you.
Okay, I am Nina Maouelainin, interventional pulmonologist, opened up a private practice, and I am around Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and I love Twitter. Twitter has been my make it. Actually, I consider it the make it or break it in the world of med Twitter. It has allowed me to stay up to date with regards to all the conferences. I am a fan of live tweeting, and I really use it as a resource for education, but also as a platform to allow patients to believe that private practice is still possible. So that's in summary where I am with Twitter.
That's excellent. All right, Bradley, how about you?
So I am a private practice otolaryngologist. I'm a partner at ENT and Allergy Associates in New York. And I am on Twitter for really very little to do with otolaryngology. I have a podcast called The Physician's Guide to Doctoring, and I started Twitter just as a way to spread the word about the podcast. And I find it as a great tool for networking, for finding new people to interview, to inform people about the episodes that are coming out. And it is also a black hole for my time. I tried removing it from my phone so that I stopped using it and would only use it when I really needed to for the podcast. Somehow it snuck back onto my phone, and I end up going down these, and I'll type messages and then delete them. And then, because I'm so afraid to, to post sometimes. I don't want something I say to be misconstrued, but I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Yeah, that's a great point. We'll definitely bring that back up, the double-edged sword of Twitter for us. Sue, welcome. We're just making an introduction, so let us know where you are, your specialty, and what things are like on Twitter for you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I am a radiologist. My specialty is breast imaging, but I still do all of general radiology. So for me, Twitter is something that I do basically to see what's going on. It's sort of, I get sometimes, news or something in, certain medical areas that I'm interested in. I get, the latest trends or the latest technology. And at the same time, also, if there's something that I feel I need to let others know about, that I feel that it's a platform for me to let others know. Certainly with something like breast cancer, I think it's sort of my duty as a physician that knows about the latest technology to kind of let others know about it. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I use it. But when it comes to social media, I only started because I wanted to make sure that I knew what my daughter was doing. Mm-hmm. So I started that about, I don't know, when did it start? When they all started getting on social media, that's when I did. And so because of that, I needed to know about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I know all about TikTok, whatever there is, I need to know about it because I felt that it was a space that my daughter was entering, and I felt that I needed to know about it so that I could educate her. And then I realized, wait, now I also need to learn how to educate her as to how she can use it as a young lady that's entering the workforce. So for example, LinkedIn, well, what is that? And how can she use that? And so on and so forth. So that's why I use it.
Yeah. Excellent. I think some really good points here that are going to lead to some helpful discussion for our listeners. And let's talk about, we'll go with the benefits. We're going to focus on the positive here. And each of you are using it for different reasons, right? We hear networking, we hear promotion of other mediums of communication, we hear education of patients. And so what do you see as primary benefits, either personally or professionally, for you on Twitter? We'll come back to you to start, Nina.
So I'll start with the professionally. I think Twitter has been a phenomenal platform to meet other interventional pulmonologists and other subspecialties that are at the forefront of battling lung cancer. What was interesting is all the caregivers and the advocacy movement all have a very strong presence in Twitter. And there are so many fundraising opportunities, like I said, advocacy available now on Twitter, that if you would like to ask a pretty forward, like for example, the GoTo Foundation, one help in a community or another, you can just tag them and they would actually respond, and they will bring it to the forefront a topic that otherwise would have been in the back, in the dark. The best example I can give is today in one of the Encore alerts, rehabilitation for cancer patients was something that we all knew needed to be established to help them mind and body, but also to reintegrate everyday life. Very few knew that pulmonary rehabilitation is actually not covered for patients that have cancer. If cancer is on their HPA, on their PMH, on their past medical history, the actual insurance, CMS included, will not cover rehabilitations. And I was surprised that a lot didn't know that. PM&R then got into the conversation, and that's how it went. So I think professionally, it allows me to stay up to date with regards to the conferences that I cannot attend personally. For example, CHEST that just occurred, phenomenal platform. We were actually number 29 worldwide on the Twitter platform. And that was because we had a social media ambassador in the actual CHEST community. And that's all we did. We live tweeted all the new breakthrough articles, abstracts, communication, exchange of ideas. And we were able to create a whole forum through the messengers in Twitter. So professionally, it's been extremely useful. Personally, it allows me to meet and discover, believe it or not, the other extreme, history. There are history avid Twitter accounts that allowed me to learn more about Roman history and Scottish history. So you could have really a benefit. Try not to live on Twitter. Like we said earlier, you could just dive right there and have a full-time job just tweeting. Cases, of course, whenever you have something that's really interesting to share with the few interventional pulmonologists worldwide. I mean, there isn't that many of us in the country. We're around 400, 500. But if you have an interest in cases, or you need to use a certain needle or something else that you would like to ask other people without violating HIPAA, that would be a phenomenal platform. You just tweet and tag everybody within the main institutions. Hey, did you have a case like this? And we go from there. So that in a nutshell, how Twitter impacts professional and personal life.
There's a couple of pieces I'd like to expand on in there. So when you mentioned bringing something to the forefront for a foundation, for example, or getting funding, have you had significant impact? Have you had a follow through on that? Like you said, hey, we need funding for this, and somebody says, oh, we have money, and it came together. Has that happened?
Yes, we are actually doing a campaign for Lung Cancer Awareness Month in November. And we're working with a fundraising with Right Heart Breathe Easy to Ride for Pearl. The campaign is going to be Rise for Pearl, because Pearl is the ribbon for lung cancer, which surprisingly, I created the hashtag Rise for Pearl, and I'm hoping it's going to take off. RISE, Pearl. Rise for Pearl, and I'm hoping that that's going to allow people to understand that Pearl should be the new pink, and we really need to be at the forefront of such a killer. I mean, this lung cancer has been absolutely a nightmare. So yes, we were able to connect with the GoTo Foundation as well as Right Heart Breathe Easy, and we built a campaign, and now all the funds that are going to be coming through in November will be going toward the compassion care, lung cancer compassion care, because we had a hospital that was able to actually get involved, and here we go. So hopefully in the small communities, we will be able to bring hope back and work with multiple hospital associations that have Twitter accounts to understand how it is that you can raise fundraising in programs that otherwise wouldn't have benefited from the forefront technology in interventional pulmonology.
Yeah. And I love how you brought in those cross specialty engagements as well, you know, that PM&R showed up in that way for you too. Let me put you up to a panelist. All right, let's think about your personal professional benefits. Bradley, what do you have for us?
I mean, for professional benefits, I have these two completely different hats that I wear, right? In my professional life, I don't really use it for otolaryngology. That being said, I recently led a Twitter chat, a primary care Twitter chat on some otolaryngology issues. So I guess I ended up, and one of the people that was tweeting on it is one of my referring doctors, although I don't think the referring doctor realized that it was me leading the Twitter chat. But you know, for that way, you can use it as a great way to network and reach out to people in your area. Like if you are trying to grow your practice, let's say you're a new physician in an area, then you can find the other physicians in your area and specialties that may refer to you, follow them on Twitter, and then engage with them. And, you know, instead of going to their office and bringing them lunch, which they're not going to sit through because they're too busy and they don't really, you know, they have their, you know, it's like, I think convincing someone to change who they're referring to is like trying to convince someone to change who they're voting for. Like they have the doctors that they're using and everything's fine. I mean, it might not be fine, but you know what? It's fine. That's not what I'm thinking about right now. I'm thinking about the patients I just saw and the next patient I'm going to see. But if you connect with them on Twitter and they like you, then they might think, you know what, this is someone in my area that practices in a specialty that has needs, you know, that I have need of this specialist. Maybe I should try sending to them. So I think you let them make the decision instead of just, you know, acting like you're a rep, which is what I did when I first moved to an area. Now, that's not why I use Twitter, but I think that is an effective way to use it. I mean, for me, like I said, it's more of a way for me to find guests to be on my podcast, which has been great. You know, people that when I first started this is like my third year doing it. I have like almost 100 episodes. When I first started, I started with people in my immediate circle. I wasn't on Twitter. I was on Facebook. And the only stuff I did on Facebook was political posts that would make my wife get mad at me because I never posted pictures of our kids. But you know, so Twitter was this brand new avenue for me, and it, you know, I don't even have that many followers. I think I have 700 and something followers, but still, I'm able to connect with all of these people in different walks of life that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to connect to. And you know, you can loop them into your conversations in order to get them to know who you are, so then you can then network with them. Like even if you can't direct message them, you can respond to their tweets, you can like their tweets, you can engage with them where they are, and then, you know, find a way to communicate with them that way. I mean, I wouldn't recommend just adding them in all of your tweets. That's, you know, a little rude to try and get them in your mentions, or I don't even know the lingo, but I think that's an effective way to increase your network and to communicate with people that you otherwise wouldn't have any access to in other venues, because you can't do that on Facebook. You can't really do that on LinkedIn. And as far as I'm aware, you can't do it on Etsy or Pinterest. I mean,
Oh my gosh, so those are choices too. There's like way too many things to have to, to follow and monitor and manage. Thank you for that. How about you, Sue? What do you see as the benefits personally and professionally?
For Twitter? Well, I mean, I like to ask some questions. It seems to me that some of you certainly are using Twitter a lot more than I am, or you've been using it a lot longer than I have. I mean, I do use Facebook quite a bit still, only because there are a lot of Facebook groups where I can go and get a lot of my answers, and I can interact with a lot of people. For example, one that I like very much is a breast imaging radiologist, and it's quite active, and we get a lot of information, also some from COVID. So I wonder, how many physicians do you think are using Twitter when you say that you're connecting with different colleagues and people throughout the world? And, you know, my question would be, how many do you think are actually using Twitter? And do you think that, so I guess what I'm saying is that it seems to me, for me, it's relatively new. And, you know, I've been learning a lot when I go on Twitter as far as what I can learn from Twitter. So for example, there was, I forgot where it was from, but someone was putting on cases, you know, like mammography cases, breast cases. And they say, you know, what do you think it is? And it was sort of a challenge. And then pathology would come along. And I thought, wow, I didn't even think that someone could do this on Twitter, that you could actually put on cases to look at, because I always thought there was only a certain number of characters, how much information can you really get in there? So this is all very new for me. So I'm here to talk with all of you because I'm thinking that Twitter is something I'd like to do more, but I don't know how much more it can do for me. And I'm learning from all of you right now.
So,
Yeah.
do you want me to take that one? Can I?
Oh,
So,
go for it.
believe it or not, if you just look up hashtag med Twitter, you will find a ridiculous amount of physicians on Twitter. More specifically, interns, students, residents, fellows,
The younger
because
ones.
oh my goodness, yes. And and the head of departments. I mean, just from my standpoint, when it comes to interventional pulmonology, there isn't that many of us, and pretty much, I think, pretty much a good 60 to 80% of us are on Twitter, because that's
Wow.
our way of communicating worldwide. We might be a couple thousands, so that's our best bet to communicate. And we created our societies are on there, like I said, CHEST, ATS, SCCM, and you're seeing more and more societies having a pretty strong
Yes.
presence, especially with the webinar world. But tons of physicians. The older crew, like if I had someone who is 70, 80, probably, surprisingly, some of them are on Twitter. Pathology, I swear to God, they sit down and they just do the tweets. And to answer your question with regard to how much can you tweet, you can tweet lots. You can actually have threads, and you can, for example, decide, okay, I'm going to have 15 sections. And from the get-go, you put 1/15 and you go. And you obviously,
That's what I've seen.
I don't do it on my phone. I do it on the computer, but you can have like 3, 4 screens. I'm a big fan since the COVID era in telemedicine to have 3, 4, 5 screens, and each one would be for something. And you can just go ahead. And like I said, you can live on the social media and the webinars and everything else.
Can you swing your screen around and show us your setup there, Dr. Nina?
I am actually in the living room right now.
Oh, okay.
My setup is in the office, but I'll take a snapshot. And I had to have an L desk, and literally because I cover multiple hospitals for the IP standpoint.
At the same time?
So yes, so because I cover 4 counties and we are covering 5 hospitals because there isn't that many IPs. And that's why I'm private. So because you couldn't just hold on to one hospital and not have the other patient be able to see you there because their insurance is not accepted in that hospital. That's how I made the jump, and I went from private practice to allow pretty much everybody to see me. And I'm sure Leah will talk more about this. But as physicians, we are able to really tap into multiple hospital systems, multiple societies, and tag them on Twitter. You will want to have a webinars. Go ahead, tag everybody, and they will retweet. And you probably noticed on the tweet at this point, when you retweet, it automatically gives you the ability to comment. So you're not just retweeting blindly. Or when you try to retweet, it tells you, did you read the article before you actually decide to retweet it? So people are more conscientious of what it is that they are actually retweeting or liking.
Great. It's like epic. It's another alert for us
yes,
to click through.
Of course.
Are you sure you want to prescribe this?
Are you aware of the counter in there? Yes.
Excellent. That's a great segue. So Leah, thank you for joining us. Tell us where you are, your specialty, and we're talking about the personal and professional benefits of Twitter right now.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dr. Leah Houston. I'm an emergency physician. I am also now an entrepreneur working on a startup. And I'm one of those people who was like the last to join Facebook, didn't really use it that much. And then once I became an entrepreneur, I realized I needed to get into social media more. So actually, one of the investors in my company told me I needed to get on Twitter. And that's why I did it.
Yeah, she was, I interviewed her on my podcast, and it was one of my most shared episodes on Twitter. Because of her Twitter presence, I actually got a lot more people following the podcast because it was followed so widely on Twitter.
Oh, amazing. I didn't even know that. That's great. Well, that's cool. I love that. It was really amazing being on your podcast because it was like the third one. And that's, I think, definitely one of the ones that got me a lot more traction. So thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And are you noting those benefits yourself, Leah? Are you seeing that engagement and awareness grow being on there?
Well, yeah, I have about 17,000 followers now. And, I'm pretty vocal. I say a lot of things that most doctors won't say, very clearly and loudly voice my opinion about the middlemen in medicine, the disruption of the doctor-patient relationship, all the stuff that we feel disempowered about. And I frequently get messages. I totally agree with you on this. I can't say it out loud because I work for XYZ University, vertically integrated, system or private equity firm or whatever. So, yeah, I think I have a lot of haters, partially because of, I'm pretty vocal, but I also have I think I have a lot more people who are grateful that I'm saying the truth.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about how we use this with patient care. If you have had any cautions made for you, we heard a little bit about HIPAA recommendations last night and not taking photos in the hospital and making sure that you verbalize the consent directly in any posts. Are you finding that you're using Twitter at all, or are you observing appropriate, inappropriate use of Twitter by physicians in that way? And what recommendations might you have for the listeners?
Well, I personally think that the physician community is extremely respectful. And I do have to take this opportunity to let people know that HIPAA is not a privacy act. It's a portability act, a portability and accountability act. It does not have the word privacy in there at all. It has nothing to do with privacy. It has to do with information and data sharing. So if you go to patientprivacy.org, you'll read a little bit more about the whole, lie about HIPAA being a privacy act. But yeah, we do have a duty to protect our patients' identity and their private health information. And I personally think that I've never seen anybody do anything inappropriate. I think I've read a couple of articles of other people doing, but I've never actually seen that. I think we as physicians are pretty ethical people overall when it comes to that kind of stuff. Maybe unknowingly, I did hear the talk yesterday. There's somebody took a picture, and in the distance, there's like the monitor with the patient's name and stuff. And if you zoom in on the picture, you see that. And that is something that potentially unknowingly people are making that error. But, that I do also wonder sometimes now with AI, having, for example, an X-ray. Okay, well then the name's off of it, the date's off of it. There may be a day where there's a database of every single X-ray that was taken between this date and this date from this health system. And you might be able to, just the way you're able to find a picture through Google picture search on the internet and find out which website that picture came from. There might be a day where you can find out whose X-ray that was, so there are, potential ways of unknowingly breaching, patient trust and, breaching ethical boundaries in that way. I can imagine that. So
that's interesting. I know for me, that's why I use my mammogram. If I was going to take a picture of anything, it was my mammogram. I didn't say it was, but and you couldn't see a name of anyone. But if anybody chose to use any AI, they'd find out it was mine.
Right. And that's also why when I'm doing my application for my demo, I use my own medical license, so I don't want to put anybody else at risk. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a wild world out there. I mean, this is a very, the digital era of communication is still in its infancy. I mean, like this is, Facebook went public in 2012. So recent, not very long ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else ideas around patient stories, either complications or even the benefits, right? Are we seeing that? Are you using it personally? Are you noticing other physicians really use patient stories as compelling ways to engage through Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something on some of the more engaging physicians out there. They're great storytellers, right? Like, I think Kimberly Manning, is it? Grady Doc, right? She is, I think that's her name. She is just an incredible storyteller on Twitter. If you follow her threads, it's like everyone, I end up in tears. But but then how much of that is a real patient? How much of that is a melange of different patients? So we're in murky waters, right? We're in murky, ethical, legal waters, and we are not trained in what is okay and what is not. We're only told what we can't do. And of course, the lawyers are going to tell us what we can't do. Like, if you asked a lawyer, you should never start a business because you know what? There's some risk involved and you might get sued. So you ask a lawyer, should you go to medical school? No, because you know what? You might hurt someone someday, or you don't, but you still get blamed for it and you're going to get sued. So they're not risk takers. So, they're always going to tell us what we can't do. And then it's not so clear what we can do, even when there is a lot of good to be done. So I think it's challenging, and I think it behooves the medical establishment to help train us on what we can and can't do. This is something that wasn't. I graduated medical school and apparently 6 years before Facebook went public. So this was not something that we were talking about, but actually Professor Modrad from last night, this is something that she teaches, and to her credit, because it's not something we're learning a lot about. Like, where is the line? What can we say? What can't we say? Where can we say it? Who can we say it to? But these are stories that need to be told to engage physicians, right? Because the more engaged we are, the less we're going to be suffering from burnout, because we need to feel that there's value in what we do. And the more engaged we are in things like this, the more community we have, the more people we have that understand us, that get us, right? Nobody gets us like we do. Nobody gets what you go through every day like a fellow physician, as much as they might try and understand. So I think it's important for us to be engaged in that way, and also it then brings the patients in so they can better understand what it is we're going through. But what can we and can't we share?
Mhm.
It's in many ways, I think it's a moving target.
Right.
It's so true. And I think many are very cautious in posting anything that is our specific cases. They might give the story and the general idea and ask questions. We tend to use the WhatsApp platform to be able to actually discuss cases, specifically in IP, not on Twitter. And you don't know who's reading. And you don't know, like you said earlier, if somebody recognizes a detail, a story, and some people are out there just scouting to figure out, okay, who is going to get in trouble this time? Is it going to be a story? Can we just Twitter bomb that account because of one thing or another?
Mhm.
And the other thing also that I wanted to point out is the implicit bias, the uncomfortable topics that otherwise wouldn't have been put out there are now being put out by people that have Twitter accounts and that not necessarily very open about where they are from or which residency program they're in, how they're treated by this by this attending or that attending, and they rally a certain support. And they feel that by using the Twitter platform, they have a bigger voice and they are feeling empowered to take a certain standing that otherwise they wouldn't have. And so both on the professional aspect as well as for patients, look at what happened with COVID. And I can give you the example of the physicians that needed the remdesivir, that needed the different drugs that were only for compassionate care. Literally, they tagged the pharmaceutical companies telling them, we need this. We need this in this hospital. And that automatically actually got the pharmacy to respond. And I know 2 physicians that ended up getting the drug on compassionate care because of a Twitter explosion whenever it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So, I mean, it's unbelievable what you can do with Twitter. It's such a useful tool to be able to get the help you need for a certain person or certain community. But we just need to be very careful, because if the majority doesn't agree with you, they might, like I said, Twitter bomb your account, and that's a whole different feeling.
Yeah.
What's a Twitter? What's a Twitter bomb?
It's a sometimes called a pylon. Basically, all right, hopefully I don't get a pylon for this, but I think there's a lot of virtue signaling that happens on Twitter. Like I'm more PC. I do everything that's like that is beyond reproach, ethically, and so people love to be that person. And if you say something that isn't so, and I'm sure this happens to Leah, frequently, that isn't necessarily with that moral majority. I don't know if that's the right term. Then what happens is you'll get maybe tagged, or maybe someone will retweet you, and then all of a sudden you have all of these other people in Twitter, on top of you. I mean, I'll give it a kind of an easy example. There was a resident who was involved, who was, I think maybe he was might have been a medical student, or maybe he did it as a medical student and then became a resident, basically misrepresenting himself as a fully trained physician, endorsing products that were not proven.
Dr. Mike.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
no. Dr.
Different
Mike.
guy?
No, not Dr. Mike with like tons of followers, Dr. Mike. It was, no, I'm not referring to Dr. Mike. I mean, I'd rather name this person by name because he's been dragged through the mud already. And all this while he's a trainee.
I know who you're talking about. I'm not going to say it though.
Yeah. So what happened was, some people on Med Twitter caught wind of this, and it was, as far as I'm concerned, unethical, and as far as many other people concerned as well. And so there was just this Twitter pile-on where tons of people were tagging him and retweeting him and posting him. And eventually I think he ended up getting kicked out of his residency program, which is not, wasn't necessarily the inappropriate thing to do, but Twitter ended up becoming the judge, jury, and executioner.
Exactly.
So the court of public opinion ended up really being so damaging. And I don't think the residency program would have been able to, I mean, I'm sure they can make their own decisions, right?
Obviously not.
Well,
I mean,
they might not have even been aware of it.
It's like it's like a suicide by Twitter can happen. That's right. Literally, you're sure it's just.
I mean, the cancel culture is a big problem, and that story in and of itself, I don't think I know who this person is. I thought I did, but that's a big problem when an academic institution destroys somebody's life and career because they had a lapse in judgment briefly on social media outside of a clinical space and misrepresented themselves. I'm not saying that what he did was right, but we all know that once you're kicked out of residency, you're never going to work again. You know what I mean? So it's a pretty harsh punishment for, nothing. I mean, it had nothing to do with clinical care. I don't know how I feel about that. I think the cancel culture is doing more harm than good in many instances, including this one.
Well, my point was that the residency program can make their own decision, but Twitter had already, Twitter made the decision, right? Twitter dragged this person through the mud with the pylon, which leads to, the name really being out there, as opposed to the residency program, like someone informing the residency program, they make their judgment, and that happens between those two parties without the court of public opinion.
Or, I mean, the residency could have just taken certain steps, but standing by the residents to educate them. After all, they are trainee. This is not the right thing to do. We understand the Twitter bombing and stand by him, educate him to be a better physician. So it's really depend on how how much pressure they feel, and it goes back to what Leah is trying to fight for. We need to stand our ground and truly live in our, and I'll let Leah explain, but ultimately I think we should not be influenced that way when it comes to life decisions in our medical world, be it from insurance powers or from administration. As physicians, I think we can use the social media, like you said earlier, to educate, take a stand, rise for our profession, and not be bombed one way or another on social media, but rather use it and twist it. I mean, we have two scandals that happened: the Med Bikini scandal. Oh God, we'll tell you all about the Med Bikini. That article that was published. Oh my gosh, that's why there were all these surgeons in their bikinis.
Raise your hand if you put up a Med Bikini photo.
No.
I did not, but
I did
I
not.
was proud of
did.
everybody who
It wasn't
did.
on Twitter though, because I'm learning that.
Oh
now,
yeah,
so.
you did, Amelia. God bless. But and then you had figs. What happened with figs and the scrubs?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, if it wasn't in the Twitter era, I mean, think about it. And yeah, so I think it's a double-edged sword.
Interesting.
And so how do we navigate that space? And I think as fiction, stronger than nonfiction, all of these pieces, how do we help people see, where reality might end and where real life and in-person engagement should have more power? How do we help navigate that when we are seeing so much benefit, right? So much reach. Like you said, you can interact with people in your specialty across the world, access medications. So how do we wield that power responsibly and not allow it to have these negative impacts? Do we have the capacity to do that?
No.
I personally, I don't really look at, so to a certain extent, social media, the current platforms are empowering, but they've reached a plateau and a limit. And in fact, in many ways, they're also disempowering because these algorithms take over and they start, amplifying the figs debacle, for example, rather than something more meaningful and potentially more impactful that could be happening that people aren't able to even see because the algorithms are suppressing it. I personally have a problem with the suppression of the physician voice. There's physicians' opinions need to be heard over non-physician opinions when it comes to medical advisement. We've seen this problem with the vaccine situation. These anti-vaxxers, their voices are so loud. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous to the public. So, it's part of why, I advocate for these kinds of things and why I'm trying to build a solution. But, it's only empowering to a certain degree until the algorithms take over. I mean, if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, please watch it. It's surveillance capitalism is what's happening with our attention and our time and our data. It's scary.
I think, it's hard because for the algorithm to recognize that we are the true, like we're bearers of the truth, because it's not necessarily true. There are plenty of physicians out there that spread misinformation. I think you're always going to get more likes and more follows and more reach if you're talking about sex, drugs, or violence. And so, a lot of the time, the anti-vaxxers are willing to use such extreme examples that they're going to get more reach, they're going to get more likes because they have more attention grabbing details. Whereas because we're physicians, we think like physicians, we talk like physicians. So if someone asks us like, are there any side effects to it? Or is it going to work? Our answer is not going to be, hell yeah. It's going to be, well, probably, but there are these other things you can see, like we're not able to engage in the same way that they engage because we're not able to talk like they talk because that's not how we,
because we're scientists and we're ethical and
exactly,
we don't lie.
Exactly. I mean, lies are always going to get you more likes. Lies are always going to get you more follows. Lies are always going to get you more attention. And I think
it's like the world of journalism and paparazzis. I mean, the paparazzi is, what is it? The tabloids or whatever, they sell like crazy when you look at what's happening. So in Twitter, I think that's an issue. But one way to get around it, at least when it comes, if we use Twitter for the Twitter platform, to be able to educate, at least within our community, I think having societies, the CHESS Society, for example, Society of Interventional Pulmonology or anything else like that, to use that platform and tag them when you are introducing an idea or new phenomenon or an article, will give them more credibility in a sense that, okay, the actual society is endorsing this. And that way you will have the ability to have your own peers supporting you or discussing with you a different point of view while being polite and not going into the world of like you said, hell yeah, hell no. But you're totally right. I mean, the way we grew up and the way we were raised is to be very modest, humble, and not too pushy, rather really scientifically prove one point or another. And it's not how the world works.
And I wonder, and we had this question posed from one of the viewers as well, what about physicians, right, who aren't transparent? And we looked at that, white coat marketing, endorsing products that perhaps aren't appropriate. Do you see Twitter bombs used effectively, as appropriate, we'll say censorship or guideline management or adherence to make sure, the profession isn't being discredited by those from within?
I don't think we're great at censoring ourselves. I don't think any profession is great at policing itself, right? I think because we're so reluctant to attack one of our human beings are tribal by nature, right? We if you were excluded from the tribe, you died. So evolutionarily, we are tribal, and so there's a tendency to protect the tribe, even when we know that a member of the tribe is not behaving in the most ethical way. Like it's really hard to be the one to, if someone's hawking a supplement that is just, garbage. It's really hard to be the one to call them out.
But I think it's so funny that you call it tribe, because I always try to, the analogy that I always have in the world of medicine is like Scotland and the clans. So they're always feuding. It's pulmonology, it's cardiology, it's ENT, send it here, send it there. But ultimately, they all are united against England, right? They want to actually confirm their identity. So I think ultimately we need to be able to get our peers in check and encourage them to go and retract. But the problem is, and I'm going to give you the example of, again, interventional pulmonology, is the industry is taking advantage of that, especially when you have only few products. I mean, when you look at interventional pulmonology, the industry is literally growing exponentially with the robotic and the new tools. Because a simple example, when we placed stents or when we dilated airways, the balloons, when we started, we used everything that was in the GI cart. So there was no interventional pulmonology, if you want, platform in multiple industries. Now they're growing it, and everybody wants to push their products. So if you, God forbid, post a case on LinkedIn stating, I use this and this, the industry is going to take that and advertise like, oh, look, so-and-so did this and this and this, and it goes on Twitter, and automatically they want to make it the mainstream method to reach that. But we're just starting. So you can just imagine how that can go down the wrong way, because what if there is a better product? Are they even going to have a chance now that everybody is using the other one? So we need to be very careful as far as who to endorse or how to state clearly, all right, we're consultant, we are trying to develop the products because they're not available at this point, but it's a very slippery slope. And if you get sucked into the marketing to communicate a certain idea for the industry, they're winners, but you need to make sure that your patients are not going to be the losers ultimately.
Right. And because of the stark anti-kickback law, the white coat marketing is, you're putting yourself at risk if you do try to get compensation for this, even if you truly do believe in the product. And, we're kind of, we as physicians are in this really nasty conundrum where we are we're undercompensated. We have uncompensated, time. We're on Twitter during our free time talking about this stuff, improving our knowledge, connecting with our colleagues, getting the best care for our patients. And we're worried about all this other stuff. And it's really sad and scary what's going on right now, but we're obviously here figuring it out. I mean, that's what this is about. So it's also an exciting time because things are shifting.
We had a follow-up question there. So is the only way to have unquestioned integrity to never engage in offering any service or product yourself? I can go to the
These are
extreme
the
margins
extremes.
there.
These are the extremes.
And an additional question from the audience is, where do we think we are? And we mentioned, how will the medical associations begin to teach us, and when they teach us, are they then telling us what's required, what these parameters are, what we can do on social media? But are we seeing it come up in medical training programs or in schools, right? Is this going to be a course? Is this going to be a requirement? Both how do you engage personally, like what is allowed if we're looking at that, or how can you use this effectively professionally? Are we seeing that emerge at all, or do you see that on the horizon if it's not there yet?
I think so far it's mostly just what you can't do, right? The hospitals are trying to get out there and they're trying to cover themselves. The institutions are gonna get out there, they're trying to cover themselves. So they want to make sure that you don't do anything that is going to get you in trouble or them in trouble. But I don't think we're at the point where we're being taught how to use it as an effective tool for learning or teaching, probably because it's still in its infancy and it's the Wild West out there, right? Like it's hard to know what to do, and it's such a matter of opinion, right? Like you have 5 different doctors right now, all of us using it in a completely different way for completely different reasons. So I do think it would be a good idea for, I mean, my entire podcast is predicated upon all the stuff that we should have learned but never did while we were in medical school. So there's a theme here, but
I mean,
but I don't think they're there yet, and I'm not in that position, so I don't have any idea of when that's going to happen. I think it's just what not to do.
I want to make it really clear that if I was working right now, I would have been fired. I'm being very, very honest about things that are happening. I coined the hashtag mafia contract because there have been contracts that I looked at when I was, considering locum tenens opportunities, and they had a social media clause in these contracts, basically saying that they owned my social media handles and that I needed to give away all my rights and sign over their, the login and stuff like that. I've seen that. These things are embedded in our contracts. I hashtag the phrase mafia contract, kind of over that because, they're owning every piece of us. We have no rights in our personal life, none in our professional life. We have no, we can't even uphold the Hippocratic Oath in the exam room. And now, on social media either. It's really, I don't think that they should teach this in medical school. I think that they should shut up and leave people alone, and they should teach, the practice of medicine, and that's it. I think that a physician's personal life should be just that. I don't think I do think that we should be professional because, we want our patients to trust us and we want our colleagues to trust us. But I also think that this ridiculous standard that we are being held to is outrageous, and the compensation is not appropriate for the level of the level of expectation that they have from us. Not even close, not even touching it. Outrageous.
So then can I ask the question, I know we talked about this a little bit yesterday, if you should indicate where you work or not? Should you have your Twitter and not indicate at all where you work?
Well,
not mention them at all for that reason? Would
it
that absolve
depends.
you?
Well, it depends what you use your Twitter account for. If it's a personal Twitter account, and you need to make the difference between a personal Twitter account and an official Twitter account. If you have a private company, you end up with, I have 2 Twitter accounts, one that's for the company, and I'm not going to post anything personal in there, but my personal opinion is my personal opinion, and I'm allowed to post it on my personal account. Again, like Leah said, I'm independent. So otherwise I would have had probably administration down my back. Okay, you cannot post anything that will represent us because we own you. Mm-hmm. And when we are private physicians, and that's the whole point, is to be able, look at the interventional pulmonology platform. Like I said, they would tell me who to see and who not to see in the hospital because they would accept or not their insurance contracts. It was just absolutely crazy. So ultimately, if you are independent, you're free to post whatever you would like. But for right now, residents, as well as physicians that I employ, cannot maintain a social media platform without really looking behind themselves and making sure that administration isn't going to come down on them on Monday morning if they post something like they're half drunk and laughing on Facebook.
Sure, of course.
So it's really dependent on what type of accounts you're holding.
Yeah, what capacity you're using it in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been a super vibrant discussion. We're coming up to the final 8 minutes here, and I think we can probably have maybe one more question. And I'd like to also have people know where they can find you on Twitter, right? You can share your handles there. Also on other platforms of social media, if you have a website, as you mentioned, Bradley, your podcast, and perhaps some takeaways. So as we go around and share that information of where they can find you, maybe a takeaway that we can take perhaps as encouragement on why it can be beneficial for us to participate on Twitter as physicians. Nina, I'm going to come back to you first.
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Lung Solutions. My handle is right on the screen. My private company is Lung Health Services, and really I created it as a platform to be able to encourage interventional pulmonologists to build their private practice to serve as many patients as they can, regardless of their geographical location, their financial hurdles. It is possible. We need to take back medicine. We need to really rise and stand strong. And I think Twitter and social media is going to allow us to do that, because I think we might be ahead of these hospitals that are not invading Twitter yet. They're trying, but generally the population is not looking for a hospital on Twitter. They will go on the internet. So on Twitter, we will be able to create a strong platform, united as physicians through our societies and just as a group altogether. So we have a strong backing from the herd, from the tribe, and be able to teach one another and set our own rules, not wait for somebody else to tell us what to do or not to do. I think that's the pearl, is you can stand, you can have an opinion, and together we can bind and rise stronger. That's ultimately what I would like to communicate.
Yeah. Bradley, how about you?
So you can find me on Twitter at Physicians Guide, or my website, physiciansguidetodoctoring.com. It's my podcast where I've actually interviewed Leah and Sarah Mojarad and Donna Coriel. And actually I think it was my 5th episode was with Shika Jane about how to effectively use Twitter, because she went from something like 0 to 2,000 followers in a year or under a year. She posts a lot about oncology, as she's an oncologist. Well, so, and my podcast it's a personal and professional development for physicians. And the tagline is everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. So check that out. And so, sorry, what was the question?
Any key pearls or takeaways as to what, why physicians should be motivated to use? You've answered that some, I think, but any other?
Yeah. So one, why should we be on it? I mean, networking, it's a great way to meet peers either in your area that are out of your specialty that you might need to refer to, or internationally who are in your specialty or just might share interests. It's just a way to amplify your voice and find other voices and other opinions that might agree and might dissent. But one of the takeaways from Sarah Modrad's podcast with me was, don't write anything that you wouldn't want your 1st grade teacher to read. And actually, don't even put that in an email. I mean, in an email, because you never know when your email is going to get copied and pasted and sent to someone else,
Correct.
right? You never know when your private communications will somehow be made public. So you really need to be very measured. But in our situation, maybe not your 1st grade teacher, but your next patient. Make sure that whatever you're writing, you are okay that your next patient might read it. So I frequently will tweet or retweet, political things. And if my patients, right, if they're from the other side of the political spectrum, they wouldn't want to see me because of that. Well, then, I have to be okay with that. I have to live with that. So that's something to keep in mind. Whenever you're about to hit that button, make sure that send button, that tweet button, that it's something that you'd be okay with your next patient reading.
I like that one. Sue, how about for you?
Well, my handle is, I'm at Dr. S.J. Grosso. And, I'm using Twitter more to network and for education. I don't post as much because I'm still new at this. And, as you were saying, I'm being very careful about what I post, what I tweet, because I know that you never know who is watching and my patients and so on and so forth. So I use it more to network with people, to learn about others, to educate myself. And then if and when I do tweet, it's because something that I feel that is very important, that as a physician, I let others know about it. So if there's a technology, for example, contrast enhanced mammography, maybe something that people don't really know about. And so I feel that it's my duty to teach others. That's when I'll tweet or retweet something that I think someone else is something that's very important, that I consider important. But I'm just careful. So I'm using it to network and educate myself, I think.
Perfect. All right, and Leah, where can they find you, and why should physicians be on Twitter?
So I'm at Leah Houston MD across all platforms. And I also have my company account, which is HPEC ID, because it's an identity privacy security company. So I'm on Twitter because I needed to connect with fellow physician colleagues and amplify the message that, it's kind of the same message that we've been talking about on this platform here. We have a duty to our patients. Our patients come first. We all took the Hippocratic Oath. And so now we feel to a certain extent conflicted. Do we shut our mouth? Do we allow ourselves to be censored by the large vertically integrated health systems that we work for out of fear of retaliation? Stop sharing things that are important for not only the patient community to hear, but sometimes our physician colleagues. I talk to some physicians who work with residents and they're like, oh, I wish I could tell the residents this. We are really at a precipice right now as a physician community. We either need to stop being told what to do and do the right thing again, and stop being afraid of these systems because, we do have this duty, or we can continue to be complicit and continue to just do as we're told blindly out of fear and continue to watch the deterioration of the doctor-patient relationship, the deterioration of our profession, and this fractured health system that has been now exposed because of coronavirus. We can see it become more fractured. We can see this mass exodus of physicians to continue. And that's not what I want to see. I want to restore privacy and trust to the doctor-patient relationship. And so that's what I tweet about. That's what I share. And yeah, I'm really grateful for the people that are with me on that journey to, doctor autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And can you let me know the spelling for Leah Houston MD and the HPAC so I can include these?
Sure. It's Leah Houston, M as in Mary, D as in David. Mm-hmm. And then at HPAC, H as in Harry, P as in Peter, E as in everyone, C as in cat, ID, I as in identity ID. And that's, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. But I think Twitter is where I spend most of my time. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for giving your time. I'm sure these conversations will continue and hopefully will encourage more followers and more participants on Twitter.
Thank you, Amelia.
No, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye. Nice meeting you all.
Likewise.